So do you have slides or what? Do you have slides or what today?
Board member. I'm listed in the front of your catalog. I'm with the Princeton Middle School. I am very pleased and gratified to be here this evening to welcome you to this, the fourth board in the series on sex, gender, and social change. For those of you who are perhaps here for the first time this evening, some of our fabled walk-ins, you might care to know that, and I hope these words will entice you to come again, that this evening is brought to you as part of the Ann B. Shepard Lecture Series, which annually selects a significant topic for 6 to 8 weeks of intense multidisciplinary scrutiny. The lecturers in the series, I should add, come from many places, from Princeton University, of course, and we're extremely grateful to the Princeton faculty for their stimulating participation in the series over the years, and also to Princeton, the institution, of course, for generous access to the place like this lovely Friend Hall auditorium. But our speakers also come from elsewhere, from Rutgers University, from Fordham University, from the chaplaincy at the Lawrenceville School, and from wherever intelligent discourse and lively inquiry take place. This fall, we've already heard from Professor Lee Silver, specialist in molecular biology and public affairs, who focused on some of the genetic mechanisms of sexual difference. Then we heard from Sue Carroll, a political scientist from Rutgers, who spoke of the perceivable gender gap in the upcoming, at the time it was still upcoming, presidential election. One of the many points Sue Carroll made was that no matter how you slice the electorate, there is always a gender gap. We want to hear more from her in the future. Beth Jameson, a lecturer in politics at Princeton, gave an eye-opening and meticulous account of the complicated lawsuits that are shaping and modifying the legal meanings of marriage in the United States. Which brings me to this evening's guest. Professor Jeff Nunakawa, who was educated at Yale and then at Cornell before joining the Princeton University English Department, is a Victorianist. That is to say, he specializes in English literature from about 1830 to about 1900. His first book, The Afterlife of Property, studies how the novels of Charles Dickens and George Eliot labor to preserve the idea of secure possession and define the relation between material possession and happiness. There are other titles by Professor Nunakawa, including a bushel or so of articles, but I'd like to emphasize and indeed recommend to you his most recent book. It's about Oscar Wilde, and as its title, Tame Passions of Wild Styles of Manageable Desire, promises, it considers the pull of desire that is as intense as a compulsion and yet somehow safely under control. Professor Nunakawa's current project is a book whose working title is something like, he says, something like Eros and Isolation, Getting Away from Others in 19th Century Fiction. This book brings a range of social theory to bear on writers like Jane Austen, Charlotte Bronte, William Thackeray, Charles Dickens, and once again George Eliot, in order to figure out, and I quote, why it's so hard to break free, even for a little while, from the groups that surround us and define us. This evening we have the benefited Professor Ninnekauer's vast experience on Eliot. He'll be talking to us about Unrepresented Teresas, Franchise and Femininity in George Eliot's Middlemarch. Please welcome Professor Ninnekauer.
Can you hear me now? Exactly. My pocket. Is this still working? Okay. I'm going to actually approach the topic, even the title of my lecture, obliquely. That is to say, I want to present something to you, and the question of the relation between franchise and femininity, I hope, will become clear as we go along. But what I really want to do is to do what people in my business do, which is to study a text. I hope fairly carefully, certainly doggedly. And that text is going to be, for the most part, the first few, the preface to George Eliot's great novel, Middlemarch. I'm just curious, this will help me. How many people have read Middlemarch? Okay, so this is Eliot's novel, and it takes place, it's meant to take place immediately, I forgot, before or after the first franchise, first reform bill, I can't remember. Anyway, it's very much caught up with the issue of electoral reform and how many people who gets to vote, and how to expand the franchise. Of course, the question of women voting was never an issue. 1832 was the first reform bill, and I can't remember, not this awful, but I can't remember whether the novel was placed right before or right after the passage of the first reform bill. In any case, it's published in 1872, so 5 years after the second reform bill. These reform bills were just about expanding the franchise to more and more men. That is to say, the property qualification, how much property had owned, decreased of these two bills. That's the only context that I really need to have out there. But what I really want to do, actually, is, as I said, to approach this issue from a kind of different direction. And I want to start by talking about love. This novel is essentially caught up, with not just this novel, the life that Eliot describes and helps to prepare us for, is caught up with the relation between love, private loves, and political action. And I want to talk about the way the preface signals its, what I regard still as stupendously, well, just stupendous ambition to bring these things together. A bit abstract, of course. Let me bring this home just a little bit, and I'll turn to the text immediately. Let me start with a very simple point, and that is, when we think of the most normal, natural mode of, when I say love, what comes to mind is romantic love. That is to say, it may be love for, or I should say, not just romantic love, but specific love that takes a specific object or objects. That is to say, your wife, your husband, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your children, your name, whatever, specific. And I want to talk about something that I think Eliot gets at as well as anyone ever has, and that is a notion of love which surpasses such specificity. I wanted to start with that. I promise you this will come back to femininity and franchise, but I wanted to start with that. And to make this point, I want to look at the text itself, but one last thing before we do that, and that is, just to say this, just to make my point by contrast. We may recognize many different kinds of love, but typically the one that we think of as the most intense is the love of a special someone, the man I love, the him or her whom we go home to or want to go home to. Whether this object of desire is of the other gender or our own gender, we cast such love in a league of its own, separate from, and finally, let's face it, more thrilling than all sorts of other forms of affiliation. I'll name a few: nationalism, national loyalty, affection for friends, or say class loyalties, or caste loyalties, etc., etc. Even gender loyalties, sisterhood is powerful, etc. And I want to suggest that what Eliot tries to do is to imagine a form of love every bit as intense as that which we associate with a lover, but which takes as its object something as broad as, well, society itself. And to make that point, let's look at the text. And I have handed out 4 pages altogether. And where I want to begin is the prelude. And I really want to spend time on these, I think, kind of astonishing lines. It's really just 3 paragraphs. Prelude, and it begins, "Who that cares?" So it's the first of the first pages of the 4 pages that I hand out. So if you don't have it, at least I hope you can at least have ocular access to it, because I actually do want to spend a fair amount of time with these lines. This is Eliot's, the beginning of her great novel. Well, whatever it is. Who that cares much to know the history of man, and how the mysterious mixture behaves under the various experiments of time, has not dwelt, at least briefly, on the life of Saint Teresa, has not smiled with some gentleness at the thought of the little girl walking forth one morning, hand in hand with her still smaller brother, to go and seek martyrdom in the country of the Moors. Now, okay, first of all, what's wrong with this sentence? I mean, what's odd about this sentence? What is untrue about it? What seems false? What rings false about this sentence? Is there anything about this that seems odd? That's a real question. About this first.
I think several of us have started our days without thinking.
Exactly. Several of us have started our days without. Exactly. Several of us have started our days without thinking about the picture of Saint Teresa seeking martyrdom. Moreover, even those of us who imagine ourselves caring about the mysterious mixture, about the history of man and how the mysterious mixture behaves under the varying experiments of time, has declined to dwell even briefly on the picture of Saint Teresa. Do you see what I'm suggesting? I mean,
Yes.
You do, of course. Yeah. Partly you could just read this as kind of Eliot's, what her detractors would refer to as her kind of show-offiness. I mean, she was a woman of really unmatched erudition, and she was never shy about demonstrating that. So there's a sort of show-off element to this. But what interests me more than that is what is being yoked together here, and assumed simply as what should be yoked together here. What is yoked together, brought together, opposites which are brought together, and the attitude of the sentence, of the writer of the sentence, which is one just assumes that these things belong together. And what are those things? Those things are the most abstract and general of interests in the social or the human collective, a sense of sociological abstraction of the most, well, abstract sort, right? What do I mean? I mean the history of man and how the mysterious mixture behaves in the varying experiments of time. This is the era of great historians, and moreover, this is the moment where what we call sociology is being invented. British sociology in particular. FYI, and we'll come back to this in a minute. One of Eliot's close friends, closest of, well, they were close friends there, was Herbert Spencer, who's most famous, of course, for the concept of social Darwinism. We'll come back to Spencer again. In any case, so on one hand, what it draws together is a care for, an investment in knowledge of the history of man and the most abstract and general interest in the social, the human collective. Is that care is paired with tenderness for, not just knowledge of, but a sort of tenderness for 2 little kids who do what little kids do, run away from home. 2 little kids who run away from home in pursuit of some harebrained little kid scheme, right? By the way, this is FYI, this is one of Eliot's favorite motifs. Kids running away from home. Just the simplest thing in the world, right? I mean, precisely with all of the kind of domestic coziness of that notion, running away from home. not for good, but to go become queen of the gypsies and in Nola Flossom. There's always sort of running away from home in a pleasantly Hamish way. Now, so in other words, the pairing of the social sublime and the kind of homey cute, the abstract, the universal, and the local. Look at the second sentence. So anyone who cares about, so just get what's happening so far, because I think it's intense, really interesting. A pairing, a yoking of two quite distinct opposites. What are these opposites? These opposites are a concern for broad history, long durée, and the Hamish acute, right? Those things are the same thing in the sentence. It is a very odd conjunction. Second sentence. Out they toddled. So out they toddled. She's really good with verbs of walking. Out they toddled from rugged Avila. I almost pronounced this word wrong. From rugged Avila, wide-eyed and helpless-looking as two fawns, but with human hearts already beating to a national idea. Already beating to a national idea until domestic reality met them in the shape of uncles and turned them back from their great resolve. Now, I want to notice these tiny individual vessels of affection, to use one of Eliot's phrases in another novel, vessels of affection, in tempo with a collective project, a national idea. The smallest individual desires are defined not as, what do little kids want? What do we, that's what we all want, but little kids were plainly so. Not generally national ideas, right? It's not generally pursuit of national ideas. It's a toy or maybe a fantasy or a tree house or whatever. You see what I mean? But here, these two little kids, their hearts are beating in tempo with a national idea. A national idea. Defined as their hearts are beating to the tune of a collective interest, an interest in an abstract collective. Now, this national idea isn't described here as the object of conscious reflection, or the object of conscious desire, but rather something that determines the physical patterns of affection. My heart beats fast for you. That notion, what could be more primal, simple, individual than that? My heart beats. Now, as one grows older, obviously, you can hear the national anthem, and your heart can beat. But two little kids, their hearts beating to a national idea, they're not even hearing anything, right? And their hearts are still beating. This national idea. I think this is amazing. This is the most powerful because most apparently natural desires, that is to say those desires which are felt along the pulse, as Wordsworth would say, felt in the body, as the body, by one organ or another, right? We identify such passions, such desires, such drives, with as the most powerful. Usually we associate them with a girlfriend or a boyfriend, a Romeo and a Juliet, a husband or a wife. Here it's a national idea. A national idea. This is the almost, I think, especially for people who are younger, the undergraduates, when I usually try to convey some of Eliot's abstract passion, passionate abstractness to almost unfathomable sense of enthusiasm, or the idea that a person could be, as it were, primally enthusiastic about, heart palpitating and enthusiastic about a collective idea or an idea of the collective. I always think of, when I think of this part of Eliot, I always think of that great scene in Casablanca where, after the Germans start singing Deutschland über alles, the head of the resistance in town, I can't remember. Who is it?
Paul Henry.
It is Paul Henry. Tries to get the band to start playing the Marseillaise and get Sam to play it. And Sam looks at Bogart and because he needs permission. And Bogart gives him the okay, even though he knows that means that the lights are going to be put out of his little nightclub. and they sing it, and there's the famous, French woman who's in a kind of famous set piece, romantically involved with one of the German soldiers, right? And at the end of the singing of the song, she stands up and she's weeping, and she says, "Vive la France!" And obviously it's the end of her relationship with this German guy. And I remember watching this with my mom when I was a little kid. First time I ever seen it. And I just looked over at my mom, and she was weeping, with the French woman weeping. So it was this sort of double version of this national idea as powerful, powerful enough, somatic enough, physical enough, primary enough to interrupt, to terminate this romantic relationship. National idea. Look at the next sentence. That child pilgrimage was a fit beginning. Teresa's passionate, ideal nature demanded an epic life. What were many-volumed romances of chivalry and the social conquest of a brilliant girl to her? Her flame quickly burned up that light fuel and, fed from within, soared after some illimitable satisfaction, some object which would never justify weariness, which would never reconcile self-despair with the rapturous consciousness of life beyond self. She found her epos in the reform of a religious order. Now, in the figure of St. Teresa, a desire specifically distinguished from the model furnished by chivalric romance and society, a form of desire specifically distinguished from what would find in romances of chivalry and the social conquest of a brilliant young girl, is offered up. In the figure of St. Teresa, a desire is specifically distinguished from the model furnished by chivalric or society romance is embodied. And just think about what's being spoken of here is not difficult. The chivalric romance, the Lord, the knight and his lady, the social conquest of a brilliant girl, of whom there are many in Eliot, more or less brilliant, more or less conquesting. But there's only one thing that this is about, this social conquest. What is it? What is the one thing this is about? What's one word? Marriage. A good marriage, right? That is the social conquest is being spoken of here. The social conquest of a brilliant girl, which in all the stories eventually comes down to the right man, to marrying well, right? And I want to notice this relation. If St. Teresa's passion for something beyond romance, in the sense of finding the right man, is distinguished from marriage, St. Teresa is, of course, chaste. It is instead an epic life, a broader historical mission. It nonetheless uses the models of individual romance as fuel, right? It quickly burns up. This is a very interesting sentence here. Her flame quickly burned up that light fuel, and then exactly what the relation is. I've argued to my own mind about this. The relation between that and fed from within soared after some illimitable satisfaction. But in any case, that light fuel, those romances, the chivalric romances, the social conquest of the brilliant girl, they are preliminary. They may be fuel that helps to light the light from within or whatever. But in any case, they're preliminary. They're on the way to this other, higher, different form of romantic investment. And I just want to notice the difference between here desire for individuals or individual romances. The individual romance is only the instrument for a larger social desire. That's my point. And I wanted just to make this point because I think it's actually so intensely weird and great. Just to see it by contrasting it with the usual story. And the usual story is just the opposite. This is a little thing I always ask people. The guy who made the movie Titanic, the director, he said something about the movie which I found mystifying until one finds it more and more mystifying the further away one is from the movie. That is to say, I got it at first, but it becomes more and more mystifying. He said, I wanted to make a movie that would stop just 1, 2, or 3 steps short of overt Marxist dogma. Now, I ask you, what about that movie? If you had to produce a case, what could be even mildly Marxist about that movie? Well, almost nothing. Almost nothing. Okay, but let's say if you had $1,000 if you come up with something.
No.
What?
People, the steerage people, the game.
Big time. It's pretty intense, right? You have those shots of the steel ratings being closed shut on the people in steerage as they drown, right? The people in the lifeboats are in aside from the few sort of Spartan grandees who decide to go down with the boat. Most of them are the lifeboats are occupied by the wealthy, right? But you forget all that. That's just background, right? That's just background for what? For the romance, right, between these two kids, right? That's just background. That's just so much domain. That's just so much. This is what we have, to propel a romantic plot. It reminds me of a remark that some theory guy made about something about the movie Reds, which is the romance with Diane Keaton and Warren Beatty, this critic says it's as if the movie acts as if all of the Russian Revolution was staged in order for the romance between Warren Beatty and Diane Keaton. Now, I want to notice that exactly the opposite is what's being described here in these sentences. Exactly the opposite. Individual romance, etc., are offered up as preliminary, perhaps as fuel, but just the lightest preliminary act to the grand social drama, to the grand social drama. Okay? Now, that's the first paragraph, and that's as good as it gets. In the second paragraph, watch what happens. That Spanish woman who lived 300 years ago was certainly not the last of her kind. Many Teresas have been born who found for themselves no epic life wherein there was a constant unfolding of far resonant action. Perhaps only a life of mistakes, the offspring of a certain spiritual grandeur, ill-matched with the meanness of opportunity. Perhaps a tragic failure, which found no sacred poet, and sank unwept into oblivion. Well, I think this paragraph, it does a switch on us, right? The first sentence, we get an expectation offered up, and then we're disappointed. That is to say, what the first sentence does is a little bit recapitulate the logic of the first paragraph. It says the individual figure of St. Teresa is the means or the model for a more general object or a more general model of desire, of affection for us. St. Teresa is one of many. She is not the last of her kind. There are many Teresas, right? But look at the rest of the Teresas. Look at all the Teresas who follow, according to Eliot. So the first sentence is a little bit like that scene in Spartacus, right? I am Spartacus. You know that scene? They're in the Colosseum and during the slave uprising. So the Romans say, "Okay, give us Spartacus, or you're all going to suffer." And so Kirk Douglas, famously stands up and says, "I am Spartacus," and then 5 seconds later, you know this. So he stands up and says, "I am Spartacus." Then by the end of it, so we're thinking, they're all Spartacuses, they're all St. Teresas, right? But no, it doesn't work like that. Not anymore. The collective that the text comes to here has precedence. As the preface continues, we discover that there's a big difference between the first Teresa and those that follow. What the difference spells is the failure of what I want to call social love. The failure of that coming together that we saw in the first paragraph, of the passion that we associate with individual love, and a social commitment, and social commitment. That is to say, the notion, what falls apart now is the very idea that one can bring together the passion that we associate with individual love with a broad and abstract even social commitment. That is what I think is going on here, and I'll show you why I think that. Look what happens in the next sentence. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. With dim lights and tangled circumstances, they, that is to say the later Teresa's, tried to shape their thought and deed in noble agreement. But after all, to commonize, their struggle seemed more inconsistency and formlessness. For these latter-born Teresas were held by no coherent social faith and order which could perform the function of knowledge for the ardently rebelling soul. Their ardor alternated between a vague ideal and the common yearning of womanhood, so that the one was disapproved as extravagance, and the other condemned as a lapse. Now we have an unbridgeable gap rather than the desired fusion, the noble agreement between the vague ideal and the common yearning of womanhood. What is the common yearning of womanhood? Well, the common yearning of manhood too, I suppose. That is the partner, right? This is certainly what Eliot means here, in any case. Whether that's a common yearning or not, that's certainly what Eliot means here. When she says the common yearning of womanhood, she means an eligible, it is a truth universally acknowledged. What Austin refers to as that truth universally acknowledged, or that is to say, an eligible husband, the right man, right? So now, instead of these two things coming together, we have these latter day Teresas. We have an alternation between a vague ideal and the common yearning of womanhood. A vague ideal looks back to that phrase I proposed. Looks back to the collective project already mentioned in the preface, of Saint Teresa going off to seek martyrdom over Moors, the reform of a religious order, an ideal which has now become vague because it has become evacuated of any specific content. There's no project for the latter-day Teresas. There's no realm for them to work in. There's no sphere, no public sphere for them to work in. So now they go between this vague ideal of wanting to make the world better, on one hand, and on the other hand, the common yearning of womanhood. I'll come back to the gender element in a second. I just want to notice, work this through just a little more. The common yearning of womanhood looks forward. So if the vague ideal looks back to what's mentioned in the first paragraph of the preface, the common yearning of womanhood looks forward to the romantic marital decisions that the heroine makes in the novel. Because when push comes to shove, when all is said and done, Middlemarch, I think the most sublime novel written in English, is in one way, like most novels. That is to say, it's mostly taken up with marriage problems. Mostly taken up with marriage problems. It is certainly the central engine of the narrative. One problem or another. They're very complicated problems, but they're mostly taken up with marriage problems, the decisions, etc., that form the happy or the unhappy consciousness, or in Middlemarch. Now, the ardor also between the two now, rather than managing to merge them. Look finally at the third paragraph, and then we'll look at a couple of other things and make this become clearer. Look finally at the third paragraph. And this is where things begin to get gendered. Well, I mean, look at the third paragraph. And notice something that Eliot does, or doesn't. She doesn't come out and say, things would be a lot better. She doesn't go and say, look, I'm talking specifically about a problem that has to do with the systematic, we wouldn't even say disenfranchisement, because they haven't enfranchised it, unenfranchisement, so to speak, of women. Right? Look at the third paragraph. That's just a given. Some have felt that these blundering lives are due to the inconvenient indefiniteness with which the supreme power has fashioned the natures of women. If there were one level of feminine incompetence, as strict as the ability to count 3 and no more, the social lot of women might be treated with scientific certitude. And this is famous Slack, her sometime friend, Spencer, who was convinced of genetic female, inherent female inferiority, and convinced that it could be this inferiority could be subjected to scientific measure. This was one of the things that kind of turned Eliot off. Meanwhile, the indefiniteness remains. And notice the sarcasm here. And actually, one of the things that's really great about Eliot is the way that it's almost like with a lot of her sentences, her sarcasm. It will suddenly disappear, and you'll get tenderness again. It's as if there's not a kind of bitter aftertaste with a lot of sarcasm. It doesn't persist as the sentences go along. But these are clearly sarcastic sentences. Meanwhile, the indefiniteness remains, and the limits of variation are really much wider than anyone would imagine from the sameness of women's coiffure in the favorite love stories in prose and verse. Here and there, a synod is reared uneasily among the ducklings in the brown pond, and never finds the living stream of fellowship with its own hoary-footed kind. Here and there is born a Saint Teresa, foundress of nothing, whose loving heart beats and sobs after an unattained goodness tremble off and are dispersed among hindrances instead of centering in some long, recognizable deed. Now, I want to just notice that mark the gendering here that is implicit throughout the first two paragraphs is here made explicit. The failure of the ideal of social love, that merging I was speaking of, is more specifically the positive prohibition of women from extending beyond the limits of assigned costume and love stories, beyond the limits of the private. All they have are individual stories. They aren't allowed further. That is the extent of their social compass. Now, there's a funny kind of revenge here, and I want to just mention, revenge is not quite the right word, but I want to actually mention one important theoretical work in my economist book that was done in the last 20 years. It's a book called Desire in Domestic Fiction, and it's by a woman named Nancy Armstrong. And Armstrong argues, amongst other things, it's actually kind of in the book in certain ways, but Armstrong argues, amongst other things, that women, I'm going to use the phrase she uses, the female subject, the women in the period of the 19th century, 18th and 19th century, that she writes about, she writes novels, serve as a certain model for subjects more generally. So it's a kind of ironic feminist position that she takes. In other words, women, the subjection of women, by Armstrong's argument, constitutes the model for the subjection of humanity more generally. Now, I want to make that point specifically here, just to notice that the woman that she describes here, the later-day Teresas, in her very privatization, in her very exclusion from the sphere of the public, in her very privation, in her removal from, her exile from the possibility of working in a public sphere, of caring about things in the public sphere, constitutes a kind of model for characters in general in this text. That is to say, the idiom of the central tragedy of the novel is about this failure to get public, to go public, to be public, to have public. And I'll make a few points about that a little later. But I just want to have that on the table here. And I just want to look at a couple things about in the novel itself, because this goes on. Now, actually, just remind me, how many of you read the novel? Just raise your hand. The first part of the novel, which is the funniest part of the novel, well, actually, there's a whole bunch of funny stuff. But anyway, early in the novel, there are two sisters. How much do I need to bore you? All I need to bore you with is a couple of sisters. I just need to tell you about four characters. These four characters are two sisters, Celia and Dorothea, and two men, Mr. Casaubon, and the most famous, every academic's nightmare version of herself or himself, right? Casaubon is this errant pedant who never finishes his great book about biblical cosmology or whatever it is. And then another guy named Sir James Chatham, who's eventually marries, so the two sisters marry these two guys. Dorothea marries this guy, Casaubon, I mean, I swear, anybody you've ever known who's an academic, if you're an academic, you know what I'm talking about. That is your fear in life, that you're going to turn into Casaubon. In fact, that you are Casaubon, right? That is your big fear. He is a dry as dust, as Carlyle would say, just a total pedant, can't see the forest for the trees, etc., etc. Right? And, so that's Casaubon. And he marries Dorothea because Dorothea hallucinates in him this guy with a grand view. Okay? She doesn't know better. Celia marries Sir James, who is a sort of, I guess you could call him sort of stand-up Tory. I mean, he's a guy who's concerned about his home. His politics are conservative, to say the least, but not, I mean, he's the kind of Republican that people are now nostalgic for. Right? Clean government Republican. Noblesse oblige Republican. Now, so those are the four characters I need you to know about. I just want to mention them because I want to talk just briefly about a couple of things that happen in the novel itself, which at the beginning continues this discrediting, what I'm calling the discrediting of this fusion of private and public love, so to speak, of private love and social commitment, continues the discrediting of this possibility, only now in a comic key. I just want to notice something, and I'll show this. This is the next page I want to look at. Dorothea's love of Casaubon, so to speak, and love is a strong term, or the wrong term maybe, is a love for something larger than an individual. Here's this girl, this is another Latter-day Teresa. She's doing her best to make do, right? She wants to be out there. She wants to care about something large. She wants to care about something communal. She wants to care about something social, global, beyond another individual. And she sees in Casaubon a way of doing this, an embodiment of something larger. And let's look at this passage together. There's a couple of passages. And just to realize how dorky she sounds here, it really makes the point just how tragically distant she is from the possibility of this kind of communality, this kind of communal love of the communal. And I want to look at, I've Xeroxed the page, it's the third of the pages that I have, it's just a bunch of dialogue that you have there. And I'll take it from how very ugly Mr. Casaubon is. This is Celia talking. By the way, Eliot does at the beginning of the novels something that she does with all of her novels, and that is there's a sort of goofus and gallant thing. She's always contrasting two characters, and Cecilia is Dorothea. Everyone acknowledges as brilliant, but Celia has common sense. That's the difference between how very ugly Mr. Casaubon is. Celia, he is one of the most distinguished-looking men I ever saw. He is remarkably like a portrait of Locke. He has the same deep eye sockets. Had Locke those two white bowls with hairs on them? Oh, I dare say. When people of a certain sort looked at him, said Dorothea, walking away a little, Mr. Casaubon was sallow. All the better, I suppose. You admire a man with the complexion of a cochon de lait. Dodo, exclaimed Celia, looking after her in surprise. I never heard you make such a comparison. Why should I make it before the occasion came? It is a good comparison. The match is perfect. Miss Brooke is clearly forgetting herself in Celia Costa. I wonder you should temper with you. It is so painful to you, Celia, that you will look. It is so painful in you, Celia, that you will look at human beings as if they were really animals with a toilette, and never see the great soul in a man's face. As Mr. Casaubon, the great soul? Celia was not without a touch of naive malice. Yes, I believe he has, said Dorothea, with the full voice of decision. Everything I see in him corresponds to his pamphlet on biblical cosmology. I should take that in. Everything I see in him corresponds to his pamphlet on biblical cosmology. Now, this is a ludicrous remark, right? And I want to suggest, though, that it's also a very plangent remark. What she's saying is that what she sees in him is a cosmology. This is her version, her eager, uneducated version of the Donne poem. This is her version of trying to find in one person, because that's her only choice. That's her only chance. Is this one person. seeing in this one person and everywhere a world, a cosmology, right? Everything I see of him corresponds to his portrait, his pamphlet on biblical cosmology. You can just imagine what that pamphlet reads like. Now, just one last thing. I want to suggest that loving him is not loving for her. Loving him is not just loving a multiplicity of objects, the world, but rather the very dream of bringing them together. And I want to just look at the second, the last passage now that I've handed out. And it's chapter 3. It's the beginning. It begins with that passage from Paradise Lost, Raphael coming from God to explain things to Adam and Eve. And I want to just look at this. Take it from the second passage, paragraph. Dorothea by this time had looked deep into the ungauged reservoir of Mr. Casaubon's mind, seeing reflected there in vague labyrinthine extension every quality she herself brought, had opened much of her own experience to him, and had understood from him the scope of his great work also of attractively labyrinthine extent. For he had been as instructive as Milton's affable archangel, and with something of the archangelic manner. He told her how he had undertaken to show what indeed had been attempted before, but not with that thoroughness, justice of comparison, and effectiveness of arrangement at which Mr. Casaubon aimed. I just want to notice something here. Eliot is there making fun of something, and probably as you know, it is the famous beginning of Paradise Lost, of things unattempted yet in prose or rhyme, with soar with no middle flight, Milton says, and to justify the ways of God, of things unattempted yet with things unattempted yet in prose or rhyme. So she interrupts her little thing here, giving him really the worst treat. In other words, let's take a great epic poem. Let's take a great epic poem and turn it into scholarly jargon. Right? I mean, that's what she's doing to Casaubon. But then listen to what happens as the sentence goes. It's as if she forgives him that. This is almost Casaubon at his fine. This is Casaubon as he's this is her most sympathetic, in some ways, description of Casaubon. What follows the parenthesis here. That all the mythical systems are erratic mythical fragments in the world, or corruptions of the tradition originally revealed. And the effort now is to gather them together again, as in his famous defense of the freedom of speech, Ariogenica, quotes the myth of truth being torn apart. Serious. So the point is that just that her love for Casaubon is completely hallucinated. That is to say, what she loves is not Casaubon, not Casaubon. What she loves is the idea that she manages to project onto Casaubon, and that is of a common, what St. Paul calls a continuous sin, right? And moreover, of the very labor of bringing together again, for drawing together again, a continuous city which has been rendered, which has been thrust into fragments. This is the great romance of Dorothea's life. This is what she seeks. This is what she seeks, and this is what she imagines herself finding in this shriveled pedant who happens to live nearby. And the rest is disaster. Now, as the idea of combining an individual and collective object, an individual love and a social love, as this idea is discredited, what prevails instead is a situation like the comic one between Dorothea and Sir James. See, early on in the novel, Sir James, the guy I mentioned to you, the neighbor, wants to marry Dorothea, not Celia. Celia is the consolation prize. Turns out like better for him, but in any case, she would have driven crazy. But he wants to marry Dorothea, and the two of them are engaged in a common project, which is basically improving the housing conditions of the tenant farmers who live on their lands. Dorothea is totally into this. She loves this, and he likes it too, kind of. At first, he likes it for one reason, because it lets him meet Dorothea. And Dorothea likes Sir James for one reason, because he is the instrument for rural renewal for the improvement of the housing of the poor. This is the situation that prevails by the end of what I'm calling this sort of this movement of discrediting. By the end, we have a situation like the one between Dorothea and Sir James. The chapters before her marriage to Casaubon and his to Celia. She is interested in him only as a means of the collective project, the work for the poor. And he is interested in a housing project only so he can be near her. Thus, the two desires, one for the collective, the other for an individual object, are divided and separated utterly by this point in the novel. Now, as I say, finally, this recedes from you. I just have a couple more things to say, and then I'm going to just open this up for any kind of questions that you might have. If Middlemarch, I want to suggest, trains us to be reconciled to a friend of mine calls the reality channel. This friend of mine, whenever I get fancy, he says, "Can we go back to the reality channel?" The reality channel. It keeps alive as well, though, the sense of what is lost here. A loss whose fullest extent we could never fully measure, since, in the words of the great historian, E.P. Thompson, who covered the same ground as Eliot, we are amongst the losers. Now, I want to return to one last thing, and then I'll be done and ready for any questions you might have. And that is, well, actually, two last things. When I mentioned the business about the female subject, about women serving as leading the way to a certain tragic end, what I want to just turn your attention to, there's no reason for you to bother with this too much, but there's later in the novel, there's the great, I said the novel was all about marriages. That's an exaggeration. There are other things that take place. There's, for example, an incredible election where Dorothea's uncle is humiliated, and he's campaigning for Parliament. He goes to the grocer, and he says to the grocer, the local grocer, he says, "Can I have your vote?" And the grocer says, "Well, sir, Mr. Brooke, I would love to vote for you, but if I vote for you, then I've been told I'll lose the business of so and so. Will I lose your business if I don't vote for you?" And Brooke, being an honest guy, a good guy, says, "No, I wouldn't do that to you." And he says, "But you're taking too narrow a view of this," he says to the grocer, Mr. Momsley. "A much too narrow view of this. We're one family now. The nation is a family." And Mr. Momsley interrupts there. You see, Mr. Brooke, in other words, is channeling or producing a version of what I'm getting at when I'm talking about this notion of a social love. But the grocer corrects it, as most of us might, which is to say, please, can we go back to the reality channel? That's just not true, sir. I have to think about the family. I have a real family. And we can talk about the nation as a family. That's a charming idea. And maybe, for a couple of weeks after 9/11, we feel that way. But I have a real family to feed. And it's not the same thing. Sorry. That's Mr. Momsley, I want to propose, follows in the wake the tragic path set out by the latter-day Teresans. This is what I mean about what we would call, what might call female unenfranchisement or disenfranchisement, if one takes follows the progress of this preface, as the path that is followed by everyone. Now, one last thing, because this is too depressing, and that is the slight upbeat note, and it's only slight. The end of this novel, the famous conclusion, Dorothea Casaubon dies, and conveniently, and she marries instead a guy who eventually goes to the Parliament, Ladislaw, and she becomes, when all is said and done, and she's very good at it, but when all is said and done, she becomes a housewife. She disappears from the public sphere altogether, and she has children. And Eliot writes famously about the possibility that from such relationships and such issue, all sorts of new Teresas are born, etc. And that's the upbeat. This was very much in my mind last week after the election. There's a show that I've become addicted to, a TV show. I'm not sure that you would. Well, maybe you have, but can you hear me? This thing just went. Is it now working? I'll get something back on. Okay. Anyway, this is a TV show called Jack and Bob. Have you ever heard of it?
Yes.
I love it. Anyway, the show is about this. Nancy Franklin of the New Yorker just reviewed it a couple of weeks ago, and has this great account of novel music. Anyway, it's about a history professor, a woman, and she has two sons. One is Jack and Bobby, and it's supposed to be, but it's not Jack and Bobby. And you have this incredible narrative conceit or device, which is one of the sons is eventually president 40 years later. Moment now, and these kids who actually don't like having this sort of hip feminist pot-smoking history professor mom, they or at least are ambivalent about it. Okay? And 40 years later, one of them becomes president. And after last week's episode took place immediately after the election, and of course the history professor was supporting Kerry. And so one of the sons, indeed the son eventually becomes president, says. Is talking to somebody who says, "God, your mom must be so disappointed about the results." And she said, the little boy says, "No," because she says it'll just be Hillary in 2008. Well, whether or not it would be Hillary in 2008, the spirit of the show, I want to suggest, in saying, well, not Hillary in 2008, but this boy in 40 years is all that's left of the possibility of a relation between individual and collective love. To put it just slightly differently, the only hope that Eliot finally holds out is the slight hope for the deferral rather than the defeat, of our enfranchisement, and this must be the faith that I suppose any teacher has, whether she is a she or a he, female or male. That's all I have to say. That's my presentation. So I'm now ready to answer any questions. I realized I was bearing down heavily on this text, and I just didn't really go the best way of doing things. So if you have any questions about that, or about any the implications of anything I've said. This is not monologue. This is monologue.
I'm always struck and I chortle when she compares him to a pamphlet about divine cosmology. I mean, is that supposed to be sarcastic? Is that the clue to the reader of the novel that Eliot is letting you know right then and there that Casaubon is just a small brain and Dorothea is imagining something very large, and she ought to know better. She knows it's only a pamphlet.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. And of course, all he produces are pamphlets. He never gets past. Yeah, he never gets past the pamphlet. Yes, exactly. And also, that's actually interesting because the pamphlet is it's a little and belittled form for the moment for Eliot's everything I say, and also just that tension between on one hand the pamphlet and between the form, the pamphlet, and the content, biblical cosmology. Right? Yeah. She's great. If you haven't read this book, I promise you a really grand read. It's an amazingly, it's totally absorbing. Smartest woman in the world.
But she takes on a man's name.
Yeah. Well, it's yes. And think about that. I mean, she and her and check this out for her explanation. Why did she do that? She did that, she said, because she didn't want her gender to be an issue. Mm-hmm. So, in order to become, as it were, ungendered, she has to become a man, right? And to render her gender invisible, she had to take on, in her mind, I don't think she was hallucinating. It was necessary for her to do this in her own way. Now, I should add that Eliot herself was, had a fairly complicated and ambivalent relation to political feminisms. It's not like there weren't social causes out there for her to become part of, but she, for Eliot, Eliot's first loyalties were intellectual. not political. And she regarded most forms of feminism as sort of infidel, and not cool enough for her in one way or another. Although, she did support the right of women to divorce. She supported the right of women to maintain property after marriage, which was a big deal, et cetera, et cetera. She had various political causes, but she kept her distance for the most part. Exactly call her conservative, but she was by no means an activist.
I don't know much about her. Where did she grow up?
She grew up in, I've actually been to her house. She grew up in a part of England called Nunnington. Her father was an estate manager, a huge, gorgeous estate in the middle of a rural part of England. And then she lived much of her life in London. She lived with a man who was separated from his wife, George Henry Lewis, and she lived with this guy in London. And it was kind of, some people accepted it, some people didn't. It was a fairly scandalous thing to do. It was after her parents had died, and it alienated her forever from her brother. It was a very famous, tragic thing. But yeah, that was her. Yeah.
Were there any major women novelists writing as women at that time, or was she right?
Oh, sure.
I mean, she was right, but there weren't any others.
Oh, there were. Major
stature.
Well, certainly far more popular than her. Mrs. Henry Wood. I'm suddenly blanking. Oliphant. Mrs. Trollope. You can go back earlier to another century, and you get Edgeworth. There were. But she was resolute about not having her gender discussed. Famous fact about her, and I'm not sure how true this is or not. How true this is. One of the famous sort of chestnuts about her is that her gender was exposed in a review that Dickens did. I'm suddenly blanking. Adam Bede? A review of one of her novels, and Dickens, according to this story, when I say much of this joke, I don't know if Dickens actually didn't know in advance, but intuited her gender just from her writing. No one could be so sensitive, no man could be so sensitive. So there were women of considerable popularity. Stature, Eliot was pretty sui generis. Which is to say that she probably could have gotten away with it, so to speak. But she wasn't want to.
So it wasn't a case of not being able to get published, but she did not want.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, interesting question, because then we think of the Brontes just a few years earlier, and they did think it was necessary to have at least sexually, generically ambiguous names. Yeah. Unclear to me. There's debates. Yeah. Big debates. It was no one's secret, but everyone, anyone who, the intelligentsia all knew who George Eliot was. So she hid that fact after particularly Dickens' review, but she didn't stop. She didn't say, "Oh, well, you got me now. Now I'm Mary Ann Evans." Well, thank you very much.